So Sherri, welcome and thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your time. And I wanted to start by saying that you lost your son Koby in really tragic circumstances, 2001. And many people do know Koby's story, but for those of you who don't, would you be willing just to talk to us about what happened to Koby and his friend Yosef on that day?
Yeah, so we made Aliyah. We moved to Israel in 1996, and Koby was in fourth grade. And 5 years later, we moved to Tekoa, and there's beautiful wilderness area near our home. You can actually walk from our home to the Dead Sea. You do it overnight. And there are caves there that were carved by monks in the 5th century, where monks studied, and there's an old monastery there. And Koby and his friend Joseph decided to cut school and go hiking there. And they never came back. They were gone all night. We waited for them to come back, and in the morning, they found their bodies, and they had been murdered by terrorists.
So Sherri, that's like a mother's worst nightmare. Like how do you even absorb information like that when you hear that? How does a mother just take that in?
Yeah, well, you don't. You can't take it in, but you do. I think you kind of lead a split existence from that moment forward for quite a while, because it's really not real. Like, how could it be that I gave him his sandwich and kissed him goodbye, and he's in 8th grade, he's my oldest son, and then he's gone. And I think also physiologically, because the the child has some of the cells of the of the mother, and the mother has some of the cells of the child.
Mhm.
So actually, when a child dies, part of the mother dies as well.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of, I think it's more like a kind of death and rebirth that
Yeah.
has to happen in order to absorb it. I'm not sure absorb is the right word, because I don't feel like I've really absorbed it.
Yes.
I've integrated it, but maybe, yeah, I think maybe integrating it into your life. You find a place for it, but
Yes.
it never gets totally absorbed.
I hear that. That makes sense. Is there anything that you feel you could share with mothers who might be going through, and it might not only be mothers, but as you say, there's something about losing a child just so unnatural, and obviously in the way you did was even more tragic and unnatural. But is there anything that you've learned that could help in those months where, as you're saying, you're trying to integrate it? It's almost like there's been a death of a part of you, and just to anything that you learned in hindsight, going back to those kind of beginning times.
Yeah, well, I knew right away that I had to break open.
Wow.
Even that that night, a good friend of mine who's a nurse, she came to me. She gave me Valium, and I said, "I give birth to him without drugs, and I'm going to mourn him without
Wow.
drugs."
So touched. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I would say this. I don't want to talk about it, but okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
knew that I
Mm.
had to feel it, like that it was something that I had to live. So I think one of my main messages at first is just to let yourself be in pain, even though
Yeah.
it's really hard. Like, I felt like I was going to die from the pain.
Yeah.
People don't understand how intense the pain is. Pain is like a wild animal, like that's going to
Rip.
eat you,
Yeah.
rip you apart,
Huh.
limb by limb.
Yeah.
And so you do need support. And what I found, like, I've worked with, thousands of mothers by now. And the mothers who can let themselves break and receive support, I think they do better in the long run.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's almost like my former self was not big enough to contain the loss and to contain the trauma.
Yeah.
So I had to reconstitute myself. And in order for a person to rebuild themselves, they have to break and they have to build a container for themselves that's actually bigger than
Yeah.
what they had before. But the only way to do that is to get a lot of support, because those people who are supporting you become part of that bigger container.
It's beautiful. I love that. It's the way that I relate to Nisianos, what they are. They are too big for us. The human and the person that we are can't manage them. And that, so there has to be a breaking apart and a disintegration, as you say, and then almost the rebuilding of a new person that comes through. And you're a different person afterwards. You've touched more of your essence. More of your essence is now in the world. More of our capabilities, our resources have kind of emerged. They've had to, because what we had before wasn't enough, as you say, for what was, kind of given to us. So I love that. That's beautiful. Sherri, what about I'm not sure if you had this, if this is just an assumption, but I guess in my mind, the guilt that a mother would have, that mothers would have just, and I've seen some people who have lost children, sometimes by suicide or other ways, that have just all the what ifs, all the kind of what ifs. How do you help mothers deal with that, not be consumed by just kind of the overload and the narrative of thinking that they somehow could have prevented this and it could have had a different outcome?
First of all, everybody thinks that way. It's part
Mm-hmm.
of the grief process that everybody thinks that they're guilty, because that way there's something they could have done to prevent it that they
Yeah.
didn't do.
Yeah.
But the guilt only will. I spoke to Rabbi Abraham Twersky about this, who
Mm-hmm.
he was a
Mm-hmm.
great rabbi who was a psychiatrist as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he said basically, the loss won't kill you, but guilt will.
Wow.
So I think that, I don't know how you put it to the side, but part of it is just knowing that. Well, also, we also, my husband and I, we went and spoke to rabbis, and we said, did we do something to cause this? And
Mm-hmm.
actually, Rabbi Twersky said, there's nothing bad enough that you could have done to cause this. So, in a way, it's a little bit egotistical to think that it's because of you, because it's actually, the guilt is a way of keeping control
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
letting
Yeah.
go of the control and saying, this is part of God's plan. I don't like it. I may not even like God at this point, but I I still have to continue to live.
Yeah. I hear that. And I want to come more to the God part of it in a moment. But I first wanted to ask you about, I heard you say that at Koby's funeral, you were like, before the funeral, thinking about what color hat to wear. And you were almost surprised by like the mundanity of that thought. But it seemed to, if I'm not mistaken, give you hope that life could be normal. It was almost a normal thought that you were worrying about, things that you worried about in your previous life. I've seen people go through grief and give themselves a hard time. It's almost like they don't know how to integrate the fact with that there's normal life to live, but yet, as you said, your entire world has fallen apart. And they almost feel like, I can't live with these mundane thoughts. They almost feel bad about it because, this huge thing has happened. How do you kind of integrate those two? The fact that normal life has to, at some, kind of continue, but your life as you know it has changed and kind of disintegrated.
Well, part of it, especially the day of the funeral, which was a few hours after they found the boys' bodies, because
Wow.
Koby was killed with Yosef Ishran, his friend.
Yes.
I had to get dressed, and I, went to pick a beret, and I picked the color, and I thought to myself, I was disgusted with myself. I thought,
Mm-hmm.
I cannot believe that you are so vain that you're picking the color of your hat. And then a beat later, I thought, this is what will save you. You still care. It was a recognition that I was still in life, even though I didn't want to be, and I really wanted to be dead.
Yes.
I mean, I didn't want to be dead for my family and my children, but I wanted to be with Koby, like right away. but
Yeah.
it's really a sign of life. And there's a book called The Survivor by Terence Dupre, and he talks about Holocaust survivors, and that they found that women in the Holocaust who still tried to brush their teeth as best they could and wash their face and take care of themselves, that they did better in terms of survival. So it's the life force calling you, really.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be something trivial and vain. It's actually something positive. And I felt after Kobe's death that Kobe was the oldest, but I had other children, and my youngest was 6. And just getting up and having to make them sandwiches for school and having to
Yes.
do the laundry, that all those mundane activities, they almost became holy because they kept me going. And I
Yes.
saw, first of all, my other kids, I was so grateful for them that doing anything for them, it became something that was like, it sounds kind of silly to me now, but sacred. I don't have that anymore, but it was really like that.
Yeah. No, no, I for sure hear that. So Sherri, what would you say about, I've heard people be confused between when you talk about like almost giving in to the emotion, like when you talk about the breaking apart, just allowing yourself to feel. And they've said, well, if I allow myself to feel, I'll just be in bed and I'll just cry all day. That's all I'll do. And then other people have said, no, you've got to kind of, you can allow yourself to feel, but you need to push through and take care of your family or take care of your children, especially if you're the remaining parent. Sometimes when a spouse dies, you can't just kind of give in to the despair you feel when your world breaks apart, because there is a family that you've got to keep together. How do you navigate that?
First of all, I think it's different for a widow and for a bereaved mother. If
Mm-hmm.
the bereaved mother has a partner, because then there's 2 people to take care of the children, so that one
It's
can
true.
fall apart. But what I did, first of all, I have a very good friend, Shira Chernobyl,
Mm-hmm.
and she's a grief counselor. And
Yeah.
she worked in Toccoa as an English teacher, but she came to me every day
Wow.
after Kobe was killed. And she told me it was okay to cry in front of the children and that I should take a watch and time myself. And
Uh,
I would give the watch to my kids and I would say, just give me a minute to cry. And
that's
at
love.
first, it was like I'd cry like 40 seconds, but then it just became part of life, like Ema's crying. And
Yes.
usually it's surprising because you don't cry and cry and cry. Grief comes in waves. And
Yes.
those people who think they're going to go to bed and stay there forever, okay, you know what? Go to bed for a few days. It's not the worst thing. Get up and feed your kids, pick them up at school, and then go back to bed. As
Yeah.
long as you explain, I'm doing this so that I'll be able to live fully.
Yeah.
I
That's
think it
nice.
has to do with communication and
Yeah.
just allowing pain and sadness because it's part of life.
Absolutely.
Everybody dies, but we pretend we don't.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's for me the one thing that when you have death in your life, when you've faced it, somebody's death that you love and you go through grief, I think you have to become more, I don't know, more accepting and more connected to the spiritual world and what it means to die and the transition. When you spoke about even birth and going through that pain of birth, when you described the grief breaking you apart, I can totally relate to that, having moments after my sister passed away of literally feeling like the grief was going to break me, sitting and howling on the floor as if my body was going to break apart. But yet it was very cathartic afterwards. But the same experience for me was going through labor. It was the same experience of literally feeling like your body was going to break apart at a certain point, and then the gift of life, And there's something about this transition and what's happening. I often say when my sister was passing away, she was suffering. She was in a lot of pain until the end. And but there was a way in which you could see that something beautiful and perfect was happening almost behind the curtain. You could get a glimpse of it, that the soul was trying to leave, even though in this world it looked so imperfect. And so there's a way that there's something about, kind of the process, that when we kind of connect to something bigger, and I want to talk about that soon, because I know this was quite a spiritual journey for you in terms of your own imuna, which I think is beautiful. But maybe coming to that point, you spoke about how you almost felt that when this happened, God was talking to you. God, like you could almost hear God talking to you. And I've actually spoken to another mother whose son died in very tragic circumstances, very suddenly, very tragic, who had said the same words to me. So, but what I wanted to ask you is about that, because what's really interesting I've seen is that these kind of losses and events can bring you closer to God, and they can also take you further away. And for you, it seemed to bring you closer. And can you tell us about like how that unfolded?
Yeah, first of all, I think for a lot of people, when they really feel God is not in their life, like after a tragedy, that sometimes people can become God's representatives because they bring so much compassion and love. And maybe that's part of why I could receive these messages because like I worked as a writer for a website, and we were 5 women in the room, and they were all like really into all these signs and wonders and mystical things, and I was very rational. And after Kobe was killed, I just had these experiences with birds where birds kept like knocking into me, or like I was in Jerusalem, a bird just fell down dead at my feet. I was driving and a bird got caught on my windshield under the windshield wiper. It was
Sure.
just bouncing back and forth. And then I had a dream. Well, first I went to my mother. She was
Mm-hmm.
in Florida. I went to visit her, and I was sitting on the beach by myself, and I thought it was just like 9 months after Kobe was killed, and I thought, I wonder if Kobe's soul came with me from Israel to Florida. Would a soul really want to leave Israel to go to Florida? And I sat down on the beach. I was eating the sandwich, and a bird came and hit me in the head, like flew
Oh,
right into my head.
yeah.
And then I went back to Israel, and I was learning with a friend. And we learned about, because also when I got home around the time of Kobe's yahrzeit, there were nests, like a nest right in my front door. And so I went and learned with a friend, and we learned about what's called the Kensipur Lamala, the supernal bird's nest. And it's in the Kabbalah that in the supernal bird's nest, that's where God waits to redeem the world, where Mashiach waits to redeem the world. And in that bird's nest, there are pictures of the first and second temple, and pictures of all the children who died Kiddush Hashem, pictures of all the children who died sanctifying God's name.
Mm-hmm.
So once I learned that, it was like a kind of epiphany or revelation, because I felt like this was not just a personal story, that it was part of a much bigger story. And in my book, The Blessing of a Broken Heart, I divide the book into 2 parts. There's the cave is section 1, and the bird's nest is section 2. And Kobe and Yosef were murdered in a cave. They were beaten to death with rocks. But I realized that the bird's nest was the reverse image, because they're both shaped, like a half circle, but the cave is closed. And especially like the cave near us, it's 120 rooms. It's very dark. You can't go in there unless somebody has a light, a candle, or a flashlight. But the bird's nest is open,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a place of birth, the bird's
Yeah.
nest, and it's a place of flight. So those became the 2 sections of my book. And not that I was healed, not like, oh yeah, everything's fine now. But
Yeah.
I think, we run a camp for bereaved children. We have Koby Mandell Foundation. And what I always say when we're training the counselors is that everybody who has trauma and tragedy, there's the possibility of another story. They have the story of the pain and the story of the makkah, the story of the, whatever that is in English. but
Yeah. Yes.
but then there's the story also that surrounds that, that can be a protective story, that can be a story of healing and love and
Yes.
even fun. And in terms of trauma, the amount of love and protection and nurturing and care has to be greater than the cruelty of the blow in order for the person to be able to grow from the pain and not
Yeah.
be crushed by the pain.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Beautiful. And it feels to me like God gave you such a powerful big story with the birds because the cruelty was so big, that he literally handed you a big other story, protective, as you say, healing story. It's beautiful, really beautiful. Sure, very touching and very powerful. So Sherri, is there, besides that, I loved what you said about that, if somebody's feeling kind of angry with God, like if they're not feeling the compassion of God, they need the compassion of people, kind of around them, almost to counter that. But is there anything else you suggest or you've seen in your experience that can help a person move through the anger that they have with God after something like this happens? They lose a child or a loved one, but
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think everybody has to move physically. That,
Mhm.
part of that anger is just to release it through physical activity. And even Shira, my grief counselor, she told me, go scream in the pool underwater. You can just
Wow.
scream in underwater. Nobody hears you because
Yes.
everybody has that. I don't know if it's anger, it's this horrible pain. I think lots of times people translate that pain into anger because it's easier to bear.
Yes. Interesting.
But the anger, of course, it's okay to be angry, just to let yourself be angry, but then to take that anger and translate it into a search for justice. Maybe not for you, but for other people. Like, don't stop with the anger. Let
Yeah.
the anger motivate you to make change in the world.
That's really interesting. There's somebody that I became close to whose daughter died by suicide after kind of witnessing a lot of things on Instagram and Facebook. He became quite famous. His name's Ian Russell. He was in all the media for many years. And he basically took Facebook, which is Meta, and Pinterest to court. First person who's ever taken them to court and kind of exposed what his daughter was exposed to, which was just really bombarded by algorithms of the most awful stuff that people had to actually leave the courtroom. Adults couldn't witness what she had watched. And just kind of, he's been very involved in the new online safety laws that the government are instituting. And it's exactly what you're saying. It's almost like he channeled that kind of anger or injustice into creating change. Was a nice example of that. So Sherri, what about the children? How do you support the siblings and the children and help them process and integrate something like this?
Yeah, well, I don't think I did such a great job because I was too broken.
Okay.
Um, but that's why we started Camp Kobe, because we saw our kids had nowhere to turn. Even if they went
Mm-hmm.
to psychologists, it's just not the same. And adults can speak to their friends, but when you're little, your little fourth grade friend, she's not available for you to hold your pain with you. I
Mm-hmm.
think, though, with kids, it's just to realize they know everything. You cannot
Yeah.
hide anything from them. And just to tell them to be as honest as you can be and to let them be part of the process. Like when Shira would come to me, they would also be around. So when
Yes.
I was talking, they were in and out. Also, just to like, sometimes one night I just took pots and pans, I gave them to the kids, and we just marched around banging them. Like to
Mm-hmm.
find creative outlets for you as a family, and
Yes.
also for them to do like maybe creative therapy. That's what we do at the camp. So we always do like art therapy or drama or physical activities. And at camp, when kids feel safe, they'll speak. They want to
Mm-hmm.
share,
Mm-hmm.
but also to realize they're not going to want to talk to the parents because they don't want to hurt the parents more.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So just to maybe try to include like your friends who come to visit, to have the kids be part of the conversation or at least be able to hear it and not to try to hide anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true what you say because they do pick up everything and they know things, and but the more context you can give them, the more they can be part of the process. When you look back at your children, like how do you see that this changed them going through this?
Well, it's hard for me to know because they were so young. They were
Yes.
they were
How old were they?
11, 9, and 6.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know Eliana, she now is the director of the foundation, of the Koby Mandell Foundation.
Okay.
So she
Yeah.
was she was a camper, she was a counselor, she was a
Hmm.
head counselor. Then she worked for us for a year, and now she took the whole thing over.
Wow. Wow.
So obviously, she would not be doing this, but she grew up in a family that was always trying to help people. And
Yes.
because she saw what went on in camp, we were ready during Corona. Seth and I, my husband, we said, you know what? We did what we set out to do, and we're going to close the foundation. Like we did it.
Wow.
And Eliana said, you're not closing that foundation because we can't let the children down. We have
Yes.
400 children at camp, and they
Hmm.
need camp. That's where they find their closest friendships, and that's where they find their safe place, and that's where they find their healing. My other children, like one is a psychologist, so
Hmm.
and one is a potter. He's an artist.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think that they. I don't know. I really don't know, but I think they might have still been doing the same thing. I think grief makes you sometimes either more of who you would be, or less, but it can definitely heighten your identity. So I
Yeah.
think it maybe made them greater because they're willing to take more risks.
Yes. Interesting. And when you say take more risks, is that because when something like this has happened, you have less fear about kind of life?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Like my
yeah,
Hebrew, I have terrible Hebrew. It was like I could hardly speak.
yes,
And I was like, I went on television in Hebrew. I gave a speech in front of 15,000 people because it
yeah,
was like I faced something so bad, so
yeah,
horrible.
yeah,
Like I had a mission. Like my mission
yes,
was to put Kobe's neshama in the world, to put Kobe's soul in the world.
yeah,
So when you have that mission, you're just not as afraid of
yeah.
the world.
No, it's so true. And I was thinking a lot about that, speaking to somebody else who'd lost their child tragically. And soon after, they said they made Aliyah and did some other things that they'd spoken about doing for a long while, but there were always reasons not to. And I was thinking about, just the way I psychologically kind of understand things is we have all these things that we outsource or attach our sense of okayness or security to in the world. And when something so big like this happens, a lot of those things fall away. They look insignificant. They just lack significance, and so it just frees us up to allow us to be that much more, as you say, courageous and do what we need to do in the world. So yeah, it very much resonates with me. So Sherri, you've spoken about, I don't know if it's the three C's, but quite a lot of C's.
Yeah, there's seven.
Could you tell us
Seven.
a little bit about those? Is it seven?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's fine. It's fine
yeah.
because seven is a lot to speak about. But well, it's the spiritual stages of resilience as
Mm-hmm,
as I discovered them.
mm-hmm.
Because the first C is chaos, is that breaking. But
Yes,
then the next C is community or and kindness, which is okay, but we'll just stick that in
we'll make it a C.
because because if you have that community, or if you don't have the community, if you create that community, and now with everything being online, there's so many communities available
Yeah.
that to become part of that community, then you can find the support you need
Mm-hmm.
to the next C, or maybe not the next one, but one of the C's is to create, because, God really is a creator. We
Mhm.
call him the creator. And if we're
Mhm.
made in the image of God, then really we are also creative.
Yeah.
And to take the pain and find a way to create from it, I
Mhm.
think is a way of creating resilience, because resilience is usually defined as like going back to who you were.
Mhm.
Like somebody said to me, oh, you
Mhm.
have to find a new, after the death of your son, you had to find a new normal. And
Yeah.
I said, no, I had to find a new extraordinary,
Yeah.
because normal would not have taken me anywhere.
Yeah.
So to
Yeah.
find that place of creativity makes you, it enlarges you.
Mhm.
And if you're doing it from your neshama, if you're doing it from a deep place, and my definition of resilience is becoming greater, that
Yeah.
instead of shrinking
Mhm.
from the tragedy, you're actually expanded as a
Yeah.
result of it. And it has to do with post-traumatic growth,
Yeah.
which I think a lot more people are learning about. That
Mhm.
everybody talks about post-traumatic stress disorder, which is real, and which also most people won't get it. But,
Mhm.
because we're in the middle of a war in
Yeah.
Israel and there's so much horrible atrocity being shown,
Yeah.
people can get PTSD just from watching atrocity on the
Yeah.
news. So
Mhm.
a lot of people need to protect themselves.
Yeah. So you were saying, so you got to creativity. Is that it? I
Oh
was
yeah,
waiting for
thank you. I went into chaos.
I've got chaos, community, creativity.
Yeah, so the creativity is to find a way to make something from that chaos, because
Yes.
creativity is a way of giving coherence
Yeah.
to the
Beautiful.
chaos.
Beautiful.
But it's like you can create, in terms of, you could bake pie,
Mhm.
you can.
Mhm.
For me, being creative, I don't do this, like organizing my drawers. That, for me, that would be creative, because I
Yeah.
can't do it. But anything where you're taking that energy and transferring it, but really translating it and letting it be transformed.
Yeah. Yeah. But I love the way you say that it's taking it from chaos to coherence. That's kind of the journey of the creativity. It's the mechanism through which we can do that. Very,
Right,
very powerful. Very
right.
powerful.
You're finding a pattern. You're looking for patterns or order, or a way to structure it so that it's no longer a wild animal, the grief. It's
Yeah.
something that you've given borders to, in a way, through your own creativity. Or, you know what I mean? It can also be taking on projects or building something, but it's a way of containing that energy.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. What do you think is the biggest barrier to people healing, going through a healing process when it comes to grief and loss?
One of the biggest barriers, I think, is shame, that people are
Interesting.
ashamed of how they feel. A lot of people are ashamed of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
They're ashamed that they're still grieving. They're
Mm-hmm.
ashamed that they lost the person. And I think that shame can really keep a person from healing, because
That's
they're also ashamed to take help, and they're ashamed to ask for help.
yes. Yes. Very interesting. Do you I was going to ask you something about it. Time has obviously passed, decades since you lost Koby. So you're in a position for people who are new to the grief process. And, everybody's told that it's not a linear process and that these kind of, things kind of hit you. Could be a year after, 2 years after, at different times, and you can feel the pain. It can be as raw in those moments. And that's just the nature of grief. Like, what have you kind of learned about the passing of time in relation to grief?
Yeah, first of all, time definitely helps, but it's not enough. It's not enough.
Yes.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but for me, definitely after the first year, there was a lightening. It eased up a bit. Then, it sounds weird, but after 7 years, I have found that each 7 years, there's a lifting.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, because I've been through it's 22 years. So I
Yes, you've been
saw
through three
like
cycles.
yeah. But I noticed it was weird. I noticed after 7 years it was like okay. And but that doesn't mean that like when we get to the yort site, it's like it just happened again. But
Yes,
but for the rest of the year or or Kobe's birthday or just even seeing Kobe's friends sometimes it just hits all the COVID, I don't mean COVID, I mean the weight of the loss and the missing out and the missing. But in
yes,
general, with time, you just the loss becomes part of you,
yeah,
and it's not like
yeah,
even though it sounds like it's the worst thing that could happen, it's really not. Like you always hear there's always something worse.
yes.
There's always
Yeah,
something worse.
yeah,
Not that I'm recommending it, like, it's
yeah,
definitely not a good thing, but
yeah,
just, like, to let it go, and eventually to say, it's okay to feel good, it's okay to be happy,
yeah,
it's fine. It's like, I have a happy life, b'li hara.
yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, and it's incredibly hopeful to people. It's
Oh,
incredible.
yeah. There's so
Yeah,
much hope. There's so
yeah,
much hope. It's not
yeah.
It's in fact, I think that this is gonna sound odd, but I think I'm a happier person
Beautiful.
because I can
Yeah,
let go of so much,
yeah,
Like
yeah.
kids are eating on grandchildren are eating on the couch or scribbling on the walls. It's like, okay, okay. It's
Yeah,
like bavakasha, like it's not my problem, first of all, and it's all good because it's life.
yeah, yeah. Well, life kind of takes on a different order. I'm sure it
Hmm.
reformulates itself in a way that's more aligned, I think, with probably a truthful spiritual life after you've been through something like that. Sherry, what about a marriage? I've seen that a loss like this can put a lot of strain on a marriage, obviously, because two people are going through intense grief, and that can sometimes feel very lonely and misunderstood. And the statistics show that a lot of marriages actually break down um, when you lose a child. How do you keep a strong relationship through such a loss?
You know, I think I really can't speak for everybody about marriage, but I know for myself and my husband that, and we're not like this lovey-dovey couple that are always holding hands, saying, "I love you, darling. How was your day, sweetheart?" You know, but
Yes.
after, it's more like, do you even want to eat breakfast together? No, I'm working. I'll see you later.
Yeah, I
But
can relate. Yeah.
but after Kobe was killed, I felt like we were like one person
Wow.
because we were going through something so huge that it was like our skins were both off, so that we were just in it together and like nobody else could feel it the way we felt it. And
Wow.
I think because I got a lot of support from the community and from friends that even when, he was ready to go out right away to speak and to raise money. But like when he went, my friends made sure like there was a 16-year-old girl, Aviva Sutnick, and
Yes.
they put her in my house when Seth
Yeah.
left.
Yes.
I mean, I loved her. I love her. So that we could have support. So I think if a couple is just relying on each other, that it's bound to fail because it's too much. One person is too much to handle this. Two people it's too much for one person or two people to handle.
I hear that.
So again, I think, and men also, in my experience, are more likely to want to go do, and
Yes.
women are more likely to want to stay home and feel. But
Yes.
just to give each other permission to have those different styles of grieving and
Hmm.
to turn to other people so that like the spouse doesn't have to be the only one providing emotional care.
Yes. That sounds very, very that sounds very commonsensical and very profound, because it seems like almost just a practical tip, but I can see what difference it would make. Because if you're looking for your kind of soul support really to come from this person, because you feel they're the person who went through it and can understand it, but they need to, they need to get through it in their way and process it in their way. So having, as you say, that wider support system, I can see how helpful that would be. Just to tell you a beautiful little anecdote that I heard from another mother who I said lost her son tragically. When I asked her about her marriage, she said to me, which was very strong, like yours, she said to me that when she lost her son, it felt like the whole world had been destroyed. She was sure the whole world had been destroyed. That's how it felt. And she said she would then sometimes see her husband across the room and she'd think, what? He's still here? Like, how did that happen? And she said it was almost a surprise. And she said she felt this incredible gratitude, and she started to call him her rainbow, because she felt like, just like Hashem gave Noah that sign of a rainbow to say, the world will never be
Wow.
destroyed that way. He became her
Wow.
rainbow to show there's still life here for you.
Yeah, I used a different image, that it was like I had like 50 pounds on my back, but sometimes I could pass it to him and he could carry
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And then sometimes we could both put it down together.
Yeah.
So that it was like we were sharing this weight, but we didn't always have to have it on our backs. And I really felt like sometimes he just took it from me, but not in a bad way. Like, there's people who want to take your grief and own it, as if they feel so terrible. It's not, that's not what I mean. I mean, just he was willing to carry it to give me a rest. And I felt like as long as he was carrying it, I could rest a little bit.
Very nice. That's lovely. Just mentioning other people, how did you deal with, what advice would you give people who really struggle with people? Because as you say, they're people who are incredibly supportive and almost resonate with what you need and how to be around you. But of course, no fault of their own. There's so many people who don't know what to say and say all kinds of things, which to that person who's so vulnerable and like so raw, feels like it's almost salt on the wounds. How do you deal with people who just don't know how to be around you and what to say and say?
Well, I felt like during the Shiva and like for 6 months afterwards, it was like I lost my super ego. So I didn't have that judge telling me, don't say this, don't do that. And I remember I was on a bus once with somebody, like I was just alone, but she was there and I sat next to her and she just kept talking to me and saying things that I really couldn't bear. And finally I said to her, I just need to be in silence.
Yes.
Like, just to tell people what you need, instead of worrying about what they're going to think. And if they're saying things that just feel like they're really rubbing you the wrong way, to protect yourself from them, don't talk about them. Just say, I need quiet. Like,
yeah, I love that. Because again, that's very compassionate, because you're assuming that they don't know what you need. And so you're telling them, which I think,
you're not saying, shut up.
Exactly.
Shut up. Don't say another word.
Exactly.
I'm going to die if I have to listen to you. That's what's going in my head.
Yeah.
I need silence.
Yeah. No, that's nice, because you think that what you really want to say to a person going through that is, what do you need from me? Because also everyone's grief and at every single moment is different. What a person might need is to talk or to be quiet, as you say, and a person can't get into the minds and hearts of the other. So it's helpful to know and to communicate. So Sherri,
but now I'll say things like, do you think that's helpful to me? Like that, which is not so nice, but just like, why would you I have a friend and sometimes she'll tell me things and then she'll write me and she'll say, did I hurt you with that statement? And I'll say, yes, you did.
Yes.
Like, she knows because of previous conversations. But I think as long as you can just be open about it somehow.
Yeah. I think that's great. Great advice. We often don't do that, right? Which is, we have the conversation in our head rather than to the person. Yeah. So your book was called The Wisdom of the Broken Heart, which is such
the blessing of a broken
heart. Okay, the blessing. I think I heard you say somewhere that the wisdom of the broken heart is that you know that life is short. You've got a different way of understanding life. Life almost falls in a different context now. Just maybe as a last question, are there any other kind of truths or that you'd like to share that from Koby's death that kind of have stuck with you as almost a way to live life, or that's helpful, because not everybody gets to go through something like this and learn those in their lifetime?
I think I found that just your family is, it sounds trite, is the most important thing, but to really give your family as much of you as you can, because that's where your love is, and to pray for your family and to enjoy and appreciate being with your children and your husband and your grandchildren. And also to know that it's okay to have pain in your life, that it's not going to obliterate happiness, and
Yes.
that actually pain and happiness are like sisters. You really can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
And to just appreciate the happiness you have when you have it. I think that's the strongest, that there's a kind of gratitude and appreciation when things, just of even like the mundane
Yeah.
sometimes. It's been
Yes.
22 years, so I can just be like, um, upset about stupid things too. But often I feel like I'm happier because I know the truth that anybody can just vanish from this world. And I myself can vanish from this world.
Yes.
So just to appreciate being alive.
Beautiful. Sherri, thank you. Really, really appreciate all your wisdom, and really beautiful. And obviously, people can find out more about your foundation and the work you do and the books you've written in the information below. Thank you so much, Sherri.
Okay, thank you.